Welcome to this session on conflict management, needs conflicts. So to begin, I want to just recap where we are in our 4 series sessions on conflict management. And so we started out by understanding basically what would happen if somebody else had a conflict or had a problem. And we did so by first understanding what our problem ownership model looks like. So if you remember this particular thing, we have an area where myself and another person has no problem. I don't have a problem, they don't have a problem, and we're in this area where we call rapport. So we're using rapport to be able to maintain communication. And then we worked on and looked at what would happen if that other person had conflict or had a problem that they owned. And so if that occurred and that person brought those problems or that problem to us, then we would be using our helping skills and our sensory acuity to be able to listen to the person and to be able to, number one, keep the problem on their side so we don't end up taking ownership and responsibility for their problem, but allowing them to keep the responsibility on their side and keeping the problem ownership on their side, but also helping by using our listening skills and using our ability to feedback to them, reflective listen back to them, and hopefully with that in mind, keeping not only the responsibility on them, but the solution base on them as well. So the other person would eventually come up with their own solution to their own problem instead of us taking ownership of their problem for them. So that's really cool, used a lot in management and businesses and things like that. So that's one area. And then we move down into our next session on iMessages, and we learned how when we are the person who owns the problem, what happens then? So how do we deliver a message to somebody else when we're the one who owns the problem, when we're the one who has a conflict that needs to get settled? So basically what we did was we talked about iMessages and how to deliver an iMessage using the ability to use very neutral terminology so that people could understand us. And then we're now into this bottom right-hand corner about conflict management, where both of us have a problem, and that is what we call needs conflict, where I might express a conflict to somebody else or a problem to somebody else and say, here's my problem, and they might express back to me, I own a problem too. And this also might occur when somebody comes to you and says, here's my problem. And then all of a sudden, with just the knowledge of that, we own a problem as well. So either or, we're basically into this conflict management where we both have a need that needs to be met. And sometimes those needs are conflicting. All right, so we also looked at this entire idea of the two-step. So when we give our iMessage to someone else and they receive that iMessage, we have stepped out of rapport with them. We've sort of stepped to the side and stepped out of rapport with them. And the only way that we're going to be able to get back into rapport is by reflective listening their response to our iMessage. Now, there are 3 things that can happen once we deliver our iMessage. There's 3 things that can happen that person can say back to us. Now, the first one is, hey, didn't realize there was a problem, so sorry about that. And then all of a sudden we can go, okay, you didn't know it was a problem, then great, now you know it's a problem. Hopefully it won't happen again, and we're good to go, and we move back into rapport with that person. Now, another thing that can happen is we've delivered our iMessage, we've stepped out of rapport, and that person comes back to us and says, well, I have a problem too. So that's where we are right now with this needs conflict. And they have a problem and we have a problem. And be able to step back into rapport with them, we first have to be able to reflective listening, but we also have to then use the skills we're going to use or we're going to learn today about needs conflict and how to manage that. And then the third alternative of what they could say was, I don't care, you have a problem. So we're going to talk about that in the last session in this series on conflict management, which is value conflicts. So let's talk more about this idea of needs conflicts. And what happens most of the time when we're in a conflict with somebody and we need one thing and they need another is that we both have to compromise to get what we want. So that's normally what happens. Either I win and you lose, or you win and I lose, or somehow we both have to give up a little bit to be able to get what we want. And that's what we call a compromise. And what this compromise stuff, is not exactly what we want to do with needs conflicts. In fact, we don't want to do this at all. And the reason for this is that if I win and you lose, you still have a problem. So that problem is going to come up later on. And if you win and I lose, then I still own a problem. And that conflict is going to come up, and that problem is going to come up later on. And if we both give in a little bit, we both still own a little bit of a problem. So, of course, that's not going to work, because now later on, both of us are going to have this sort of resentment still hanging around. And that's what we are trying to avoid with learning these skills about how to deal with needs conflicts, so that they're settled, they're done, that nothing comes up later on, there's no hurt feelings, that somebody doesn't come up to you later and say, well, you got your way last time, so now I get to get my way this time. We don't want that to happen. And that's oftentimes what happens in communication with others, specifically when there is a difference of how a person is situated in the power field. So what we're going to look at now is that entire arena of who's in control or who's in power. And even if you don't have the power, how you can use this need conflict resolution to be able to gain more control over what your needs are, what the other person's needs are, and to come to a better solution than a compromise. But first, let's look at power. And so this is an exercise that you can do at home that I just want you to kind of listen to. So you can stop watching the screen, or you can just sit back and just listen to a visualization that I'm going to guide you through. And this visualization allows you to understand the use of power and how it affects us. All right, so just sit back in your chair, or take a seat in a couch, or lay back, or whatever it is that you want to do, and just close your eyes and allow yourself to be guided through this visualization about power. I'd like you to choose from your memory a time when you were completely safe and relaxed. A time when you may have been in your home, or in your room, or on holiday somewhere, or in a place that's special to you. And remember what it's like to be relaxed in that space now. And as you recall a time, perhaps even just coming home from work and resting so fully that you drift off, I'd like you to notice what you could see at that time of full relaxation. Because often there's something you can see that really reminds you of how easy it is to relax. And something you can hear that reminds you of that. Feeling so relaxed. And now you can turn this safe place to relax whenever you need to go there. Because right now I'm going to invite you to remember a time that's okay to remember. A time when you saw someone using power over someone else. using their ability to reward or punish, perhaps a parent or a teacher or a boss or someone in authority. And you can choose just a time that's all right for you to remember, and really observe that time from outside, like on a movie screen, because there's something to learn from that time. So remember the time and see who's there, and listen to what they say and watch what they do. And notice how the other person responds to the use of power, both at that time and afterwards. Notice how they feel, and notice what they say in response. And notice how they behave later on in relation to that person who used power. And once you've learned what those effects of power were, you might also notice what it was like for you, the person who actually witnessed the use of power. What happened to the other person who had the power used against them later on as a result of that interaction? And then put the whole scene aside and just let it go fully, coming back to that safe, relaxed place, bringing your learnings about power with you. And now I'd like to have you recall another time that's okay to remember. This time, a time when someone else used power over you. And again, you'll find you can choose one that's comfortable enough to remember. A time when someone used power over you, using their ability to reward or punish, perhaps a parent or a teacher or a boss or someone in authority. And you can choose just a time that's right for you to remember, and really recall that time, because there's something to learn from that. So remember the time and see who's there, and listen to what they say and watch what they do, just like you're watching it on a movie screen. And notice how you respond to the use of power, both at that time and afterwards. Notice how you feel, and notice what you say in response. And notice how you behave later on in relation to that person who used power. And once you've learned what the effects of power were, again, you can let that time go. You can let that time go fully and just recall what the effects of the power were for you there. Perhaps seeing that time as a small image fading in the distance and feeling more comfortable, coming back to that safe place and bringing the memories of the effects of power back with you as you come all the way back to the room, all the way back to this place now. And now as you're back, what were the effects of power for you? When we do this exercise with others, there are several results that can happen. Number one is some people say that they fight the power. They fight against the power, and they're trying to sort of get their own point across, and they don't want to relinquish control or relinquish their own power to that other person, so they fight it. Another option for some people is that they flee, or they completely take flight in the in the power situation. So they don't even deal with it. They just remove themselves completely from the situation, completely from the environment that the situation is in. So that is another option that some people use. And some people also have the tendency to be able to have that power used against them, and they submit to that power. So they submit and allow the person to use their power over them, and they don't have a response or a recourse of their own to that person. They just sit and take it. So these are the three sort of aspects, or the three areas that we look at when people use power over us or over other people. This fight, flight, or submit. So it doesn't matter which you discovered during your process of listening to that visualization exercise, because none is right or wrong. In fact, most people have different reactions to the use of power in different circumstances. Now, it's really important to also understand that sometimes the use of power is necessary. So the use of power is often necessary in life or death situations. So if you can imagine, if you're a mother or a father who has a child that's walking across the street and they hadn't looked both ways and a car's coming, and that you grab the child and you pull the child out of the street, and you use power to do so. And you might even scold the child about not looking across the street and being more careful. And that use of power is there because of the fact that we're trying to save that child's life. So the use of power is sometimes really important to have. So we all live in societies where there is a use of power that is incorporated into the society. There are rules and guidelines that govern each and every society. So, and if you break those rules, if you go up and fight against that authority or that power, then there is consequences for those actions. So that's a kind of understanding about power and what happens in power. So what we were talking about in the NLP practice session was the fact that when you have a situation where there's a needs conflict, sometimes there's a use of power where somebody tries to use their position of authority over someone else to be able to get what they want, i.e. to get a win-lose situation or scenario to the resolution of the conflict. And unfortunately, that never works because the person who is the loser of the conflict still owns the problem. They will still have resentment. They will still have issues with regards to that problem. So it's not that it's a solution to the problem. It's just a thing that makes one person feel better about themselves. And that's not really what we're after. We're after a situation where we can have a win-win. So let's look at this particular thing. In NLP and in our conflict resolution model, what we're looking for in a needs conflict is a win-win solution. And I want to emphasize that this is not a compromise. This is not me giving in a little bit or you giving in a little bit to be able to get what we want. It is actually designed to be a win-win. What are your needs? What are my needs? And let's design something that we can get there both together. So there are 7 aspects of what we look for when we're looking for a win-win solution. And the first one that we are looking at is the importance of setting up a partnership. Now, it's so crucial that you don't skip part 1 of the win-win conflict resolution model. So the idea about setting up the partnership is if you come together and you say, we're in this together and let's solve this together, then that's fantastic. You've set up the idea that there's a partnership to begin with. If you are setting up the conflict resolution as you're on that side and I'm on this side, then there is no partnership. you're not on the same plane. You may be on the same playing field, but you're playing for two different teams. So in a partnership, we want to be on the same team as the person that we're having the conflict with, because we want to say, hey, look, this can be solved, and we can solve this together so we both get what we want. So that's crucial to the conflict needs resolution, is to be able to set up that partnership. Without it, all of the rest of the steps don't really matter. So number 2 is the understanding of exactly what our needs are as the person with the problem ownership, as well as understanding what the other person's needs are. So we're looking for, what's your goal here? What's your needs? And to determine what exactly it is that person really needs versus what maybe just a want, or maybe it would be nice to have, but it's really not important to their overall outcome or their overall goal. So it's really important that, number 1, we understand our own needs and our own goals in the situation, and then we have the ability, through reflective listening, through our helping skills, to help the other person to tell us what their needs and their goals are. So next, we want to be able to brainstorm solutions. And there's a really key element to this brainstorming solution. It's that no solution is deemed to be irrelevant or stupid or whatever. It's that we brainstorm all solutions. We don't decide or criticize them as we're brainstorming them. We just check, do they meet both of our needs? And so when we put the brainstorm out there, we want to be able to say, okay, here are all the possible solutions, and now we're going to check those solutions to make sure that each of those solutions would meet both of our needs. And then we choose which solution of those is going to be the best one that meets the win-win. There might be only one solution that meets actually the win-win, but that's the situation that you're in. If there's only one, there's only one, but maybe there are several. And if there are several, then you want to choose the best one. And again, it's a partnership, so it's both people choosing which one is the best solution. Then you want to have a plan and take action on that plan. So the person does whatever they're going to do, and you're going to do whatever you're going to do. And then you want to come back and check to make sure that both of you got your needs met. You evaluate for the fact that the win-win solution actually worked, which of course reintroduces or re-emphasizes to the other person that they don't need to compromise, that you don't need to compromise, that there can be this win-win solution, and that the partnership worked. Okay, now here's an example. So say that I am having a conflict with my husband, and I say to my husband, I need to have the car so I can go to my NLP practice session, and it's Friday night. And my husband says, well, I need the car on Friday night because I'm going to go to an industry dinner, and I need to be able to have the car to go to the industry dinner. I'm taking some stuff with me. And so there is a conflict there. Okay, I need the car, he needs the car, we're both going on the same night, and what's the solution? All right, so the brainstorming of the solution is, well, how many other possibilities are there? He can drive me to my event and then go to his. He would have to, of course, leave earlier to be able to take me to my event and be able to get to his event. Is that a conflict then with his needs or his goals? I could drive him to his event and then go to my event. So does that meet or conflict with my needs or my goals? He could take a taxi to go to his event and I could take the car. Or I could take a taxi to go to my event and he could take the car. And somebody suggested in the NLP practice session, why don't you just buy another car? Now, of course, when we're going through the brainstorming, none of the solutions are said to be stupid or dumb or anything like that. We're just saying that these are a bunch of possibilities. And between my husband and I, we need to determine which possibility works best. Now, I know my husband pretty darn well after being with him for about 25 years now, that him driving me to my event and having to leave early is not convenient for him. It's going to miss some of his goals or his outcomes about the time that he wants to be able to leave, and the fact that after the event he has to come back and pick me up. And that might be inconvenient for him. In addition, me dropping him off at his event and picking him up from his event will most likely have some situation about the fact that he doesn't want to have to wait at his event afterwards for me to come and pick him up. So most often we are probably going to be able to say something to each other about taking a taxi. All right, so that's basically, it's a really basic example of a conflict resolution, except for the fact that things like this happen all the time. And instead of having this win-win solution and brainstorming solutions, somebody will come into the conflict and say, I need this. The other person says, I need this. And then somebody uses power over the other person and says, well, you have to do this instead. Now, that's not a good conflict resolution. So this is introducing something into that where we say, hey, wait a second, instead of doing that, why can't we be in this partnership together and come up with solutions that would meet your goals as well as mine? Let's start by talking about what our goals and what our needs are, and then we can talk about possible solutions for those. So having the ability to have the language and the skill set allows you to get out of having somebody using power over you, not being able to submit to power, not having to fight the power, and not fleeing from the power. What we can do is use our language to be able to offer this conflict resolution model as a solution to both of our problems. And we have the ability to do that as long as we want to use the skill. As people mentioned in the class, sometimes they don't want a partnership. Sometimes they want the other person to lose. And most of the time when this was in discussion, it was about when you're trying to purchase something, like a purchasing manager in an organization who's trying to get the best deal from their suppliers. They don't want to be in a win-win solution. They want to be in a win-lose solution where the supplier always loses. Now, it's unfortunately the case of, reality in a lot of business. For me, I just don't deal with things like that. So if somebody is asking me to come and speak at their organization, here are my needs, those are my needs, I put them on the table, and when they try to negotiate my needs, I say, well, what part of your needs do you want to negotiate? And they're going to say, no, we don't want to negotiate any of ours. And I can say, well, you can probably understand why I'm not going to negotiate any of mine either. So why don't we try to come up with what your needs are and what my needs are and come to a win-win solution instead of you playing a power game with me about you telling me what I should and shouldn't do. So I'm more than happy to walk away from corporate presentations if they want to use power over me. It's something I teach, so I, of course, am not going to submit to that if I go out and teach people how not to submit or how not to fight or how not to flee in situations like this. So it's really important for me, integrity-wise, to keep myself going in the negotiation and the win-win solution model instead of compromising or instead of having power being used over me. All right, so the values conflict is the last thing that we're going to look at in our full conflict resolution model. So values conflict are basically when you have a problem, you've stated to the other person, and the person has come back to you and said, well, I don't care, you have a problem. So what do you do then? It's a different and confusing situation, and it's a different skill set. So I hope you join us either live at the event or in the next session in this series on values conflicts. We'll see you then.